It's Elle. Hello. If you've listened to any of our podcast episodes before, you are probably very familiar with us talking about pronouns. It's one of the most commonly asked about topics, and it does naturally come up quite a lot when we're talking about trans and non-binary people. We're pretty used to using he, him, she, her. We're getting a bit more used to using they, them, but you might not be super familiar with the fact that some folks choose not to go by any pronouns at all. And so that's what we're discussing today. I am, as always, joined by Kai. Hello.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, ready to unpack another topic.
And I think people are pretty unfamiliar with this one. I don't know if that's your experience, but it's not something that I've seen come up much with working with Transfocus. And so maybe that's a good place to start then, that when somebody says that they don't use any pronouns at all, what does that mean? The question people would probably go to is, how do I make that work then? How do I refer to someone if I can't use pronouns?
We're so programmed to default as a quick hand to talking about somebody in the third person by using pronouns, like you said in the intro. He, she, they being among the more common ones. There are others that when no pronouns, it can feel very unsettling. Like, what do you mean? What's going on here?
Right.
So people have a lot of questions. First, they're surprised. Secondly, they have a lot of follow-up questions to operationalize this thing that has been stated. And so what do we mean by no pronouns? So instead of, if somebody usually uses she, her pronouns, it means not using those words at all. And I will say for many, this is not a very quick thing because of the deprogramming we have. We default based on how somebody looks usually, unless we've updated our approaches, and some of us might wait or ask for pronouns. But some people say, I don't use any pronouns at all. And that just means no pronouns. And instead, what we're using is that person's name, or perhaps some other way of managing it, which we'll talk about to come in the episode.
Right. So, as you said, that's going to be something that is really hard to unlearn. We're so used to defaulting to people's pronouns that there's like saying they, them is a hard one for a lot of people. This one is a whole other level of having to deprogram so much. And so what are the reasons that someone might choose not to use pronouns in that way?
So for many that I've spoken to, we've not done specific research, so I don't want to like overstate things. And there's a wide range of reasons, some of which I'm sure we won't get to, and those are just as valid. But for many, they don't have a gender. So somebody could be agender, and they're not typically in our society, one's gender is reflected in the pronouns that one uses. Not always the case. It doesn't map exactly, but for many it does. And so agender is a way to reflect, or using no pronouns as a way to reflect that experience of agender, so that even they can feel like a gender to people who are agender, and that does not fit. And really what people are focused on, that I understand, is the individuality that comes from their name. So that's the primary focus, and that truly reflects who they are, or some aspects, some key aspects of who they are. And the pronouns kind of gets in the way of that.
Right.
And the way that people describe to me having no pronouns used for them, if that's done properly and consistently with the people who are in their lives, it's this like relief, like just like total pause on the constant barrage of being gendered, which some people may not be aware that that's what's happening to them because that's how they've always experienced it. But for those who have changed pronouns, you know what that feels like, right?
Yeah.
And the sweet relief of silence on that is really positive and affirming for some people. Of course, it doesn't just have to be agender. Sometimes people could be a variety of different genders, and they simply don't want others to gender them. It's something they want to do, or maybe within a smaller circle of people that they want to do, but not with others, not with strangers. So there's some dimension or dynamic around that. So it's not always just agender. There could be gender fluid folks for whom maybe they don't want to have to change pronouns. For some, that's comfortable and affirming. For others, it's not, doesn't feel as great. And so they just want to kind of have something that doesn't identify them in that way with pronouns. So those just gives you some tapestry of the different types of reasons for why people don't use any pronouns, among many others. I don't know. Have you heard of any others?
Only that I can relate a lot to this, as I think in an ideal world, I would prefer to have no pronouns used for me. But I don't really know how to describe this beyond the muddle of the way I've described it to you in the past. But it sort of feels to me like my gender is very private. And so, and I know that can be a really hard thing to understand for folks for whom their gender is just look at me and you'll know what my gender is. But for me, it's not like that. It's very personal. And so it almost feels a bit over familiar having people use certain pronouns for me, especially she, her. I feel like that's really over familiar. It feels a little bit like, have you ever heard of somebody who has a name and they meet like a stranger and that stranger immediately defaults to a nickname and you're a bit like, we're not there. That's how it feels to me, having somebody use she, her. And so, and to some extent they, them as well, but less so. Which I know is a bit in conflict with how I express my gender. People would assume maybe she, her is the preferred, like out of the two, given that I use both. But actually what I would prefer is that nobody uses any pronouns for me until we have an established rapport. And then it's a little hard to explain, and I can understand why that might be tricky to grasp, but that would be my ideal scenario. I don't do that, mainly because I don't have the energy to explain that a lot. And for some people, it really is exhausting having to explain over and over and over again. And so some people who do want to use certain pronouns or don't want to use certain pronouns won't express that because it's just too much. It's too much for them to have to handle. And I feel like that a bit. I just can't be asked to have the conversation. So my dream scenario is for nobody to use any pronouns for me. And then we have a discussion as I get to know somebody. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It totally makes sense. And I love that layered approach too. And it's not an approach for you. It's like how it would feel authentic, right? And kind of apt for the different levels of relationships that one has. And it reminds me of what happens in French and German and a few other languages where you actually have a formal you and an informal you. So in German, it's called sitzen for the formal and duzen for the informal. And people are very particular about that, as they should be, right? That, you stay at Z until you both clarify that we're good with, usually you share your first name as a way to indicate that. And so there's like social protocol around changing pronouns already. And so I understand why you don't want to go into an explanation, but it's sad that you do, given that we already have something. Like there's a concept out there already. Even if it's not in English, it's there, right? So it's possible,
it exists.
and doable.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe I'll get there one day. And I think what makes it hard is, and I'm curious about how that works in German. Maybe that's an outside of this topic conversation. But the way that I would want that would be for example, Yukai would be somebody that I feel very comfortable with, she, her. But if you say she, her about me, somebody else will take that as a sign
Right.
of what my pronoun is, you know? And so having to be like, I don't know you. Like that, it would be, and then I wouldn't feel good with you not using that pronoun. It kind of feels weird when you say they, them sometimes, not in a bad way, but I'm just like, oh, right. Yeah. Because I'm comfortable with you, but I want you to, because I don't want somebody I've just met to start calling me she, her. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You don't want them to kind of pick up what they would consider a clue, but is not a clue for them.
Right, but like that's kind of how we suggest people learn about other people's pronouns without directly asking, is to listen, right? And so, and it's a valid way of doing it, but then there's a whole other layer then of having to. It's a complicated one that I don't have the energy for, but I hear you. That shouldn't be a reason to not do something. And if we hear people who want that, we should make a really strong effort to learn how to do that. But it is a lot for somebody to have to explain all the time. So I can understand why people don't do it.
Yeah. And to also then reinforce it, right? It's the explanation, but then because it's less familiar to people, there likely is some aspect of reminding folks, or, you know, having other people remind them, you know, so there's more effort involved in general on a few fronts.
For sure. Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if life was a bit more flexible in general? Then I imagine this could be a lot easier.
Oh, yeah. Where we would be able to receive more instruction and be open to it and be like, oh, yeah, okay, cool, no problem.
I just love what you were saying about how that's set up in German, where it's just expected that you don't switch until
and if you
it's clarified.
Watch out.
If somebody else is saying do, that doesn't mean you now switch to do. They still have to say Z.
Everybody's got their own pathway.
And I need to move to Germany. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, pretty much. They're set up to be like, oh, yeah, we're going to help you reinforce this too, because very particular. Well, especially coming from English, like we have no concept of a formal you. And so, you know, I'm launching, of course, I'm a child, so it was a little bit different, but I'm launching into dudesing everybody. And they're like, holy crap.
Who is this?
What is this?
Overfamiliar child.
Person?
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I really love that the German is set up in that way. That is my like dream situation, I think. Yeah. And so with that, then, given that we don't have that set up in English, a lot of people, I imagine, kind of default to just repeating somebody's name over and over and over and over and over again. So like, Elle walked Elle's dog to the shop near Elle's house, and like that's great, but there are certain limitations to that, or maybe I should say there are other ways to refer to someone without using their pronouns, without it sounding as clunky as that. Right. Although that has its own place.
And I certainly suggested it as a beginning place, because it's just simpler to be like, wherever there's a pronoun that I would normally use, just use this person's name. Like, but as you suggested, you'll find over time that one gets tired, both on the speaking and on the receiving end. It's like, okay, we've Ellified this whole paragraph.
You mean you don't want to hear my name over and over and over again?
I know I'm awesome. And so, yeah. So you'll want to kind of spruce it up, because that's what pronouns function. There's a shorthand. It kind of breaks up the use of the name. There's a few different things it's doing within language. And so what are the replacement words that can help with that to break it up a bit more? Number one is using things like, you know, coworker, gender neutral terms, client, spouse, you know, anywhere to kind of insert, instead of the name, these other words to, you know, break up the use of the first name. Another thing that you can do, especially if you're very familiar with that person, is to have nicknames that you use, especially like cutesy ones. Those can be fun. Again, we want to be close to that person to use them and make sure they're okay with whatever you've chosen. Another thing that, you know, again, also based on familiarity, is that some people can also use somebody's last name. And again, we want to make sure that they're comfortable with that as well. That works really well in a sports context, right? We're already kind of inclined that way, anyways. So those are ways in which you can, go back and forth between all these different ways of addressing somebody without using pronouns, but still sprucing it up a bit so that it's not so monotonous. It can be a bit monotonous to repeat the name so often.
Not me having an immediate internal monologue of Hollander when you when
Yes,
you use
that's
someone's last
right.
name.
And then switches to the first name. Oh,
I know, big deal. That's what I'm saying. We got to clarify first.
yeah, yep. This is, uncharted territory for any heated rivalry fans out there. When you know. And if you don't know, maybe you should know.
Maybe you should. Yeah, you're missing out.
Yeah.
Okay, so what were we talking about? Because I've gone into heated rivalry mode now, and once I'm there, it's very hard to get me out of it.
Done.
Oh, right. No pronouns. That's where we are.
Right.
Okay. And so when it comes to to not using pronouns in that way, what's the sort of difference when it comes to, for example, how we speak versus in a writing context, like in emails or things like that?
Yeah. So, as one can imagine, speaking is ad hoc, right? It's spontaneous. Things are coming to our minds, and we're usually not even listening to what we're saying. We're just opening our mouths, and words are falling out. And so, in that kind of ad lib environment, it can be a bit more difficult to ensure that one uses not using pronouns, especially given the habit forming ways that we engage with pronouns. So I would say that would take a little bit more attention than, say, in a writing way, where you usually have more time and space and can be thoughtful and maybe spruce it up a bit with interchangeable words. And, you could just, it's a little bit easier to figure out how to do that. Of course, if you're switching between talking about different people, you might have to clarify in that way, right? If you're talking about Susan and then you're going to this person who uses no pronouns, you may have to kind of use their name a little bit more to make sure people know that you've shifted to that person, things like that. That can be really helpful for understanding. But other than that, it's just recognizing that the spoken word is a little bit more challenging to learn or to get into the rhythm of it as compared to writing, where you have more time and space.
Could I get you to go into that those challenges when multiple people are coming up in, especially when it comes to writing, because I think that is really hard to conceptualize. Could you give like an example or go into that?
So if multiple people are referenced in an email, especially if it's something about really important where clarity is key, so people don't confuse folks or get lost in the conversation, it is important to, especially at the outset of the paragraph, to specify who it is about and then have a separate paragraph about another person. So you're kind of teasing it out a little bit more. And when shifting between two people is, talking about, like the example before, Susan in one paragraph, and going on about what perhaps Susan's tasks are or what's happening with Susan, whatnot. And then if you're going to shift to the person with no pronouns, then, naturally you're already going to mention their name quite a bit, but maybe not as many shifts to, say, coworker, because then it's not clear, is it Susan or this person without pronouns? Like, you want to be really clear about who you're talking about so that people don't get lost. And also that they know what they're responsible for.
Makes sense.
I think this also comes up with the use of they, them pronouns as well, right? And I think this might be even a little bit more of an issue, especially when you say they and people think, oh, are you talking about a group of people? When only one person is responsible. So it comes up with no pronouns as well as they, them pronouns.
Got it. That makes sense. So, what are some tips for people who really want to get this right to help people get more comfortable and to start making those shifts?
Mm.
I guess also in preparation before they meet somebody who doesn't use pronouns, but then if they already know somebody,
Mm.
yeah, how they can start making that a bit more comfortable and something that they use every day.
Yeah, this is so important because, as you were mentioning, it's so hard to ask for this in a way that people are responsive. Usually, and very sadly, people just ignore that request because in their minds, it's too hard. And they're like, I can't do it. It's not such a big deal, right? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And it is a big deal. It's an important thing.
For sure.
And one that usually probably people have wrung their hands and maybe even not thought of doing it, right? So the
I
fact
can
that they're
relate.
asking for it,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So let's honor the fact that this person has come forward and asked this. And to do that, it actually does take some practice. Like it won't
Mm-hmm.
happen automatically. And I think people are a bit surprised because they're like, well, it's the absence of pronouns, but you're having to overcome the habit of using pronouns. And so as a result, I always recommend that people, um, practice with one another, like as simple as just talking about that employee or that person that you hang out with or work with or, whatever, and not using their pronouns and having that other person reflect when you do use to point it out to be like, actually use the pronoun. And what's interesting is people tend to revert to they them pronouns,
Mm-hmm.
which it's still wrong. It's still a mistake.
Right.
um, but having somebody be able to point it out, it is a step in the right direction, how shall we say,
Right. Yeah.
even if it is incorrect. But that said, if you can point it out, you can start to get a hang of just where it pops up and how, and understand where your kind of weak points are. And over time, it comes easier and easier, especially if you sprinkle in these other words other than their name or their, oops, see, I
Mm-hmm.
already did it, right? Even
Mm-hmm.
in describing that person, I just used there, right? So I think it's, for example, harder with talking about that person's possessive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Elle is going down the street, pretty straightforward. We usually use names anyways. But when you're starting to talk about Elle's dog, we would rather use there, or we have a
Mm-hmm.
stronger inclination to that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just noticing these things is a big deal and can help towards making it more kind of roll off the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is before you meet that person, really practice to yourself describing that person. Um, Another one is really slowing down. It might feel really awkward to talk slowly to a person or about a person, but I think that's really important. And I would spend extra effort when that person is there, but the same amount of effort when they're not. See,
Mm-hmm.
there I go again. When this person is not in the room.
I'm noticing that I've done that throughout this entire episode.
We're all in it together, folks.
Exactly. It takes a lot of practice and
Yeah.
to kind of override this programming that we've had our whole lives.
And, the usual of when you make a mistake, just noting it. Like we've been pretty calm. Obviously, that person isn't with us, but, I would have the same disposition of like, my bad. I meant
Mm-hmm.
no pronoun at all, or, whatever the case may be, and not like overdoing it. Like, oh, this is so
Yeah.
hard. I can't believe I did it. Not
I'm so
doing the
stupid.
belaboring. Yeah, I'm so
Yeah.
stupid. No, no. It's just that person usually understands that it's some amount of undoing and
Mm-hmm.
unpracticing, practicing something different. And
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're consistent in your efforts, people notice that and appreciate it, and you'll eventually get there. So,
Can I ask you one question? I appreciate that was meant to be my closing question, but I do have one other question that's just popped into my head.
yes.
And that is, how do you talk to people? And maybe this is too big of a question, but
Mm,
how would you respond to somebody who says that this is pointless
mm,
and
mhm.
stupid and there's just, you're asking for too much now. How do you
Yeah.
respond to something like that, especially in relation to this where it's so unfamiliar?
Yeah. Well, I would say that this is very important. And usually, if I don't know this person very well, I can speak more generally, but this is usually at the tail end of a very long process of understanding oneself, of coming to terms, of weighing and balancing, how much can I expect of other people versus
Yeah.
how I feel comfortable with myself, and what would be good
Mhm.
for me. People are constantly balancing individual versus collective needs, right? It's not like
Mhm.
we're willy nilly, just whatever and screw you. Like, so
Right.
so I think having inviting people to have a similar disposition of open-heartedness, open-mindedness, to help assure them that they can do this, right? And it's
Mhm.
okay to feel awkward at first, especially. I usually try to listen to people and what their points of resistance are. Usually beneath this is ridiculous, there's something else, and so I'm listening for that other thing. Usually it's I don't think I can do it. Like they
Right.
don't have
Yeah.
self-confidence. And it's like, no, I got this. We got this together. Like I can help
Mhm.
you. You can help me because I need to practice. Right. So just coming from a supportive stance, but firm that this is important. Um, and just, kind of explaining a bit of what goes into something like this can help people. Not always. We're not going to bring everybody along, but more people. And that's really important. And if that person can't do it, then yeah, it's a more difficult question. Like, it's not that they can't, everyone can with enough
Mhm.
practice, but that they won't. Then I would think about kind of ways of protecting the person with no pronouns
Mhm.
for that time period that person needs to wrap their head around it. Um,
Yeah.
but shaming and blaming will definitely prolong the learning experience. So
Mhm.
not I would not advise that. It's
Right.
usually something else that they're needing to work out, and to the degree that you can understand and address that, so much the better. But if you're like, saying you're so mean, or how could you, why can't you do it, everyone else can, all of that's not
Mm.
very helpful to that person's learning journey, versus encouragement, explanation, and other things can bring that about faster. Obviously, not always, but in many instances, faster.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Kai. Is there anything that
Yeah.
we've missed? I don't know if we have.
No. Besides having me recognize I'm going to do more practice on my own as well. I'm going to take my own advice.
Given the
And
fact that this is in my dream world that I would like this, it's fascinating how often I mess
yeah,
it up.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really valuable. And I think that's actually important for people to realize, that are receiving the information, the request of no pronouns, is that other person the person requesting might also have their own learning journey, right?
Of course,
Like,
yeah. I think all
uh,
trans and non-binary people can relate to that, getting
yeah,
it wrong, with other trans people getting it wrong about themselves. So when it
yeah,
comes to, especially early on, like
yeah,
it's hard
yeah,
to undo something that we've learned.
yeah, totally. And so I think typically people who don't have this experience think that others have already dialed it and
Mm.
they're the ones to have to catch up, versus we're all doing this together and we'll all make steps towards progress, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And that the kind of we're all in it together vibe is strong, as we join folks. It's not so
Hmm.
much catch up. So yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much for talking
Yeah.
about this topic.
Thank you too for sharing and for asking great questions to kind of highlight this really important topic.
Well, we'll see you next week.
Okay, bye for now.